Hello, and welcome to Same Crime, Different Time. I'm Jennifer Chambers. You know that I'm passionate about uncovering the truth. Here, we're taking that passion to the dark heart of the Pacific Northwest. As a true crime and historical writer, I've spent years immersed in the chilling archives of this region. Each week, we'll explore cases, both ancient and modern, of murder, unexplained events, strange places, and those who have simply vanished. We'll dig into the research, connecting the dots between past and present, revealing the threads of mystery that weave through our incredible, yet often unsettling, landscape. Prepare to be captivated as we discover that while times may change, the darkest aspects of human nature remain hauntingly the same. I'm recording now and it's winter. It's almost the end of February. It's pretty cold where I am. But it made me think about amusement parks. We all get excited about those as we start to think about summer. But instead, today, we're going to talk about when the magic turns dark and the historic amusement park accidents that occurred especially here on the West Coast. Amusement parks are meant to deliver joy, laughter, thrills, escape. But where there's wonder, sometimes there's tragedy. Today, we're going to explore these accidents that turn places built for magic into scenes of heartbreak, with a focus on the West Coast, where early parks like Disneyland and seaside attractions helped define the American amusement experience. By the end of this episode, you'll hear how these parks came to be, how accidents reshaped safety standards, and how communities remember the moments when the rides stopped being fun. Stay with me. It's a twist on nostalgia you won't forget. I'm Jen Chambers, and this is Same Crime, Different Time. Part 1, a short history of amusement parks on the West Coast. Before Disneyland and Six Flags and theme park mega brands, the West Coast had its own early amusement hubs. These were things like seaside rides, wooden roller coasters, pleasure piers, and community gathering spots. I talked a little bit about Oaks Park, in a previous episode. That's in Portland. There's the Wonderland Amusement Park in San Diego, California. That opened in 1913 as one of the region's first major parks. It had a massive roller coaster called the Blue Streak Racer, and it even had a menagerie of exotic animals. This park drew crowds by the thousands and put Ocean Beach on the map, but it closed just a few years later after storm damage and competition from larger attractions. Similarly, Playland at the beach in San Francisco operated from the early 1920s until 1972. It became an iconic seaside amusement area. There was even a train route that went right to Playland. It had rides and games and attractions that were beloved by generations. Actually, my family is from the Bay Area and have talked to me about that. One of the great things about that area, too, is that there was also a sea-fed swimming area that was enclosed called a natatorium, and it was enormous, absolutely enormous. But it was just absolutely gorgeous. There was also a very interesting, there was an inner Playland area, and then sort of like a precursor to the Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of thing, with a lot of kind of like the stationary, quote unquote, freak show ideas that they had. You would have like it looked like it was the Fiji mermaid type thing, where a mummified animal head would be sewn to a mummified fish body, stuff like that. Stuff that was different and amazing to people. But these kinds of parks that were all over the West Coast, in small towns and big ones, helped spread the idea of attraction and ride-based entertainment all across the West Coast. And of course, you're very familiar with the ones on the East Coast, but we had a whole bunch on our side too. But every era of ride innovation has had its dark side, sometimes literal, when things did not go according to plan. Part 2. Disneyland's early accidents. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Land of the Mouse. And when Disneyland opened in Anaheim in 1955, it promised the happiest place on earth. I mean, now, when you win the Super Bowl, what do they say? What are you going to do next? Go to Disneyland. All these major sporting events. That's a pretty brilliant marketing technique, by the way. And Disneyland, of course, succeeded. But over the decades, it also saw accidents that shook visitors and staff alike, often on rides meant to be safe and joyful. Now, you've also probably heard the urban rumor that no one actually dies on Disneyland soil. And I have heard that. A friend of, actually my sister-in-law used to work at Disneyland, and we had a conversation about this. I believe she confirmed, I can't quite remember, that from her knowledge, she actually worked at Disney World, but from her knowledge, people were not permitted to be pronounced dead until they were off-site. I don't know, and I'm not actually quoting her on this because I don't remember. I just know we just had a conversation about it because it was so cool finding out that she worked at Disneyland. So cool. But unfortunately, their first fatality at Disneyland happened in 1964 on the Matterhorn bobsleds. I mean, this is one of Disneyland's most iconic rides, right? It's huge, it's fun, it's fast. But it became the site of Disneyland's first recorded fatal accident on May 1964. 15-year-old Mark Maples from Long Beach, California, stood up in the middle of the bobsled ride, and he fell out of the bobsled. He was struck fatally after the sled descended, and this was listed as a park's first fatal accident. There was another fatality in 1984. Decades later, January of 1984, a woman named Dolly Regina Young was 48, and she was thrown from a Matterhorn bobsled car and struck by an oncoming sled. The investigators later discovered that her seatbelt was unbuckled at the time of the accident. I wasn't able to discover if she had done it or if it was just an error. My guess is it's the latter. But what a tragedy, both of those things. And there's been other incidents, whether they admit to it or not, and they're alleged, I suppose, I don't know. But deaths and injuries at Disneyland haven't all been ride-based, too. There are a couple notable ones that we do know about. In 1966, there was a 19-year-old who was attempting to sneak into the park via the monorail track, and they were struck and killed. One of the most gruesome ones is that the People Mover in 1967, there was a 17-year-old who was crushed after falling onto the track. I had read somewhere, and I hadn't found it verified, but I had read somewhere that there are a couple of other incidents of people trying to sneak into the back of the monorail ride, or into the back of the People Mover ride, behind the scenes and getting injured that way. But park infrastructure combined with human error or just risk-taking can have these crazy consequences. I can't even imagine trying to do something. I mean, I'm busy enough at the park when I'm there. These incidents, of course, challenge Disneyland and all the other parks to rethink ride safety and come up with rider restraint systems or staffing policies or emergency response things. It's funny because I'm sure that they were building it as, they build these parks. They'd never happened before in that size. So they're building the response at the same time as things are happening. So I imagine it was a lot more chaotic than I can even think about. Part 3, other West Coast accidents. Now, Disney was not the only West Coast park where things went wrong. While some parks are better documented for rides and closures than individual accidents, there are some patterns and some incidents that show that ride safety evolved through a lot of painful and terrible accidents. The park called Playland at the Beach itself had documented ride injuries, including when rides malfunctioned and people got hurt, or even, big yawn, sorry, or even when guests got ejected from the rides. One noted incident involved a rider being thrown from the Big Dipper coaster, and that resulted in a fatality. And other parks that were regional and seaside parks sometimes recorded injuries when things like the restraint systems failed or guests were messing around and acted outside the safety protocols. And those things weren't necessarily always mentioned by officials and were seen only in local newspapers or oral histories. There's been some pretty awful ones. On June 19th, 2024, actually, a ride called the Atmosphere, which was a swinging pendulum-style ride. So this is not very long ago. It got stuck at the top peak of its 360-degree rotation. So when I say pendulum, it's kind of like, it's like a basket that's suspended and everyone sits around the circle and you're sitting with your legs dangling. And so it swings all the way around in a 360-degree circle. And so it was stuck at the top when everyone was directly upside down. And there were 28 passengers. This was actually at Oaks Park, which is crazy because I've been there. I went there probably 6 months ago. I did not go on that ride. I don't know if it's still there. I would assume that it's been fixed, but that's not my jam. So I didn't go on there. But I mean, fortunately in this case, there weren't any injuries, except for one woman. She had a pre-existing condition and she was taken to the hospital. But 20 minutes is a long time to be stuck. Then there was another pretty terrible one. On July 8th, 2014, Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is in California near Anaheim. There was a ride called the Ninja that derailed, and out of 22 people on the ride, 11 were impacted. So it derailed, right? One of the cars derailed, and this seems like such a crazy scene. The rescue squad had to secure all the cars on the track with chains so that they wouldn't fall off after it while the rescue was going on. And then they had to retrieve all of the people with cherry pickers. Nobody died on that one, thank goodness. I'm sure it was pretty awful, but 2 terrible incidents occurred at California's Great Adventure. And this is another one. I went on this all the time growing up. All the time. We would go down and see my grandma down there every summer, and we would spend tons of time at this theme park in San Jose, California. I mean, it does have my favorite wooden roller coaster that's aside from my other favorite wooden roller coaster, which is the one at the Santa Cruz Boardwalk. But this one was pretty amazing also. And there was several terrible accidents that occurred there, thankfully before my time. The first occurred on a ride called the Willard's Whizzer Ride. It was a speed coaster ride in the late 1970s. I saw a statistic about this ride that between the years of 1976 and 1979, there were all these trains on the ride, just like mini roller coasters, and they would collide. There were no less than 11 documented crashes between 76 and 79. And the crazy part is that there doesn't seem to be anything that was done to fix it. And then sadly, a bigger collision happened in 1980 there on March 29th. 8 passengers were injured and a 14-year-old boy was killed. The next accident at the park was equally tragic. Native Spanish speaker, his name was Hector Mendoza. He only spoke Spanish, and unfortunately the park at that time had a policy of only having warning signs in English. I mean, that's just horrendous that happened. It's just horrendous. I had to check. That was September 7th, 1998. So, unfortunately, this is just terrible. Hector couldn't read the sign that said to stay away underneath the Top Gun roller coaster, and he walked underneath of it to get his hat, just as a car was traveling toward him. And that collision resulted in his death. Reportedly, his black hat remained on site as police were investigating. It's just, the juxtaposition of like the fun and wonderful parts. I love amusement parks. They're so great. I have an amazing time. And it's easy to forget that they're not always danger-free. In many ways, these tragic accidents helped catalyze the safety standards that we take for granted today. I mean, for instance, like the early roller coasters were just restrained by lap belts or bars. And then after a lot of injuries and fatal falls, they pushed for improved harness systems, and now you feel pretty secure. I mean, I would guess that the parks learned these lessons the hard way, and I guess you just can't ever assume that visitors are going to follow the rules. And be extra, extra, extra careful. And of course, it's hard to forget that behind each of these things is a freak mistake, a moment, and there's people who checked the rides, and guess who came and didn't leave? The maintenance crews. I don't blame them so much because, especially in the early years in Disneyland, they worked super long shifts, and people had to learn technology as fast as the rides were built. And sometimes in parks, there's just not enough staffing. But it's just so scary. I guess that's part of why we like rides, because of the possibility for accident. We don't ever assume that a bad accident's going to happen. But today, of course, all these parks on the West Coast have very rigorous safety regimes. Accidents still happen on rare occasions all around the world. There's some crazy, crazy, awful things that have happened. The one that comes to my mind is the deadliest roller coaster accident in history was in London in May 1972. It was a wooden roller coaster again. They have that reputation for being death traps more than other rides because they're wooden. They require probably a little bit more maintenance. And then if there's a tiny problem, it could be a huge problem. That's what happened with this incident. It was the Battersea Park Fun Fair in May 1972. They had a wooden roller coaster that was called the Big Dipper, and it was the site of the deadliest roller coaster accident that has ever happened. What happened in this case was that the ride was being pulled to the top of the launch hill. If you've been on a ride, you can totally picture that the lift chain pulling you up. The lift chain detached from one of the trains. And then the mechanism that is on the bottom of the carts to make them not roll back, the anti-rollback protocols, malfunctioned. So the train came going back down the hill incredibly quickly and smashed into another train that was waiting in the boarding area. Unfortunately, 5 children died and 13 other people were seriously injured. It was never reopened, and they actually closed that fun fair 2 years later as a result. I mean, thank goodness those things don't happen very often. It would make it a whole lot less fun. But it's something to remember. Something to remember. I mean, amusement parks are really like mirrors of our own hopes and fears. It's like we're joy and danger. Like you feel okay doing these things that are dangerous because you assume that they're always going to be okay. But even the happiest places can be risky. You just never know. And I mean, it's always just crazy because you're there to have the time of your life. You just never know. Stay curious and stay safe out there. Especially at an amusement park. Put your seatbelt on. If you have memories of parks where you witnessed danger or things or cases you'd like me to cover, you can email me at scdtpod@gmail.com. I thought it was interesting to talk about amusement parks today, but true to form, we have to talk about all the creepy stuff. I'm Jen Chambers. This has been Same Crime, Different Time. Thanks for being with me. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening today. Please review and rate wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps out the show. And please leave us a voicemail at the Spotify link. Also, you can always feel free to send us an email at scdtmail@gmail.com or www.jennifer-chambers.com.